The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as Devon pushed his cleaning cart through the empty corridors of Starport Genesis. It was 3 in the morning, and the massive space station that served as humanity's gateway to the galaxy was finally quiet. After 12 years of night shifts, Devon knew every corner, every hidden alcove, every shortcut through the maze of hallways that most people never saw. At 42, Devon had made peace with his life. He wasn't saving the world or exploring distant planets like the adventurers who passed through these halls daily. He was just a maintenance worker, invisible to most, keeping the station clean so others could chase their dreams among the stars. His own dreams had died long ago, buried under bills, responsibilities, and the simple reality that someone had to do the unglamorous work that kept civilization running. Tonight felt different though. The Refugee Processing Center, usually bustling with displaced families from war-torn worlds, was eerily silent. A recent conflict in the Outer Rim had ended, and the flood of desperate people seeking sanctuary had finally slowed to a trickle. Devon preferred the quiet. It let him work in peace, listening to old music on his headphones while he mopped floors and emptied trash bins. He was heading toward the medical wing when he heard it, a sound so faint he almost missed it. A soft whimpering like a kitten in distress. Devon paused, pulling off his headphones. The sound came again, weaker this time, from the direction of the medical disposal area. Years of working around the medical center had taught Devon to mind his own business. Doctors and nurses dealt with life and death decisions that were way above his pay grade. But something about that sound pulled at him. It reminded him of his little sister crying when they were kids, back before the accident that took their parents and left him to raise her alone. Following the sound, Devon found himself in the disposal staging area where medical waste waited for incineration. The crying was coming from inside one of the sealed biowaste containers. Devon's hands trembled as he approached. These containers were supposed to hold only discarded medical supplies and failed tissue samples. Nothing living should be inside. But the crying continued, growing weaker. Devon had 2 choices. Walk away and pretend he never heard anything, or break about 15 different regulations and open that container. His supervisor's voice echoed in his head, warning about the consequences of interfering with medical procedures. But that tiny voice crying in the darkness sounded so alone, so desperate. He chose to break the rules. Inside the container, wrapped in bloody medical sheets, was the most unusual creature Devon had ever seen. It looked somewhat humanoid but was clearly alien. Her skin was a pale blue that shimmered faintly in the harsh fluorescent light. She was tiny, no bigger than a human newborn, but something was clearly wrong. Her left arm was twisted and malformed, her breathing was labored and uneven, and angry red marks covered her fragile skin. Someone had thrown her away like garbage. Devon's first instinct was to call the medical staff, but something stopped him. If she was in the disposal area, it meant the doctors had already made their decision. In their minds, this little one was beyond saving, not worth the resources it would take to treat her extensive injuries and deformities. The cold logic of triage had condemned her to die alone in the dark. But she was still fighting, still crying, still clinging to life with a determination that broke Devon's heart and reminded him why he'd fought so hard to keep going after losing everything he'd ever loved. Looking around to make sure he was alone, Devon carefully lifted the tiny alien from the container. She was so light, so fragile that he was afraid she might break. Her large, dark eyes opened and looked directly at him, and in that moment, something fundamental shifted in Devon's world. He'd spent years feeling invisible, unimportant, just another face in the crowd doing a job nobody else wanted. But this little creature saw him. Really saw him. Not as a janitor or a nobody, but as someone who had chosen to stop and listen when the rest of the world had walked away. Devon made a decision that would change both their lives forever. Instead of reporting his discovery, he wrapped the tiny alien in his work jacket and headed home to his small apartment in the station's residential sector. He had no idea how to care for an alien baby, no medical training, and barely enough money to support himself. But he couldn't walk away. Not from those trusting eyes. Not from someone who needed him in a way nobody had needed him since his sister died. As the station's corridors stretched out before them, Devon whispered to the tiny bundle in his arms, "Don't worry, little one. I've got you now." 10 years had passed since that night in the disposal area, and Devon's tiny apartment had transformed into something he never thought possible, a real home. The little alien he'd rescued had grown into a remarkable 10-year-old girl he called Kira, named after the brightest star visible from his bedroom window. What started as desperate improvisation had become the most rewarding challenge of his life. Those early years had been brutal. Devon spent his days researching alien physiology in the station's public databases, learning how to modify human baby formula so Kira could digest it, rigging breathing apparatus from spare medical equipment he borrowed from work. Her twisted left arm never straightened completely, and her lungs required constant monitoring, but she was alive and growing stronger every day. The financial strain nearly broke him. Devon worked double shifts whenever possible, picking up extra cleaning contracts in the commercial sectors, selling his few personal belongings to pay for black market medical supplies. He learned to repair electronics in his spare time, earning a few extra credits fixing broken tablets and communication devices for his neighbors. Sleep became a luxury he couldn't afford, but every time he saw Kira's bright smile, he knew it was worth it. Kira was nothing like the other children on Starport Genesis. Her pale blue skin and unusual features made her stand out in any crowd, but her brilliant mind and gentle nature quickly won over anyone who spent time with her. She learned to speak Standard Galactic before most human children learned their first words, then picked up 6 other languages just by listening to the diverse residents in their sector. What amazed Devon most was how naturally Kira adapted to their unconventional life. While other kids played with expensive toys, she entertained herself by taking apart old electronic devices and putting them back together in new configurations. Her small hands and flexible fingers could reach places Devon couldn't, making her invaluable during his maintenance rounds. Every evening after Devon finished work, Kira would meet him at the service entrance with a detailed report of her day. She'd describe her online lessons, the neighbors she'd helped with technical problems, and the fascinating conversations she'd had with travelers from distant worlds. The refugee families in their sector had embraced her as one of their own, sharing stories of their homeworlds and teaching her about cultures spanning the galaxy. Devon's favorite moments came during their evening routine. After dinner in their cramped kitchenette, they'd sit by the small viewport in his bedroom, watching ships arrive and depart from the docking bays. Kira would point out different vessel designs and explain their likely origins, while Devon shared stories about the maintenance crews who kept those ships running. "You know what I love about our life?" Kira said one evening, her damaged lung making her voice slightly raspy but filled with warmth. "We're like the people nobody sees, but we keep everything working. Without you cleaning the corridors, without me fixing the broken comm panels in Sector 7, this whole place would fall apart." Devon smiled, wrapping his arm around her shoulders. "Most folks think what we do doesn't matter much. That's because they don't understand," Kira replied with the wisdom of someone far older than her years. "The important stuff happens quietly. Like you finding me, or Mrs. Chin trusting me to repair her food processor, or old Rodriguez letting me help organize his tool shop. We're building something here, one small kindness at a time." The truth was, their little corner of the station had become a hub of quiet community. Devon's reputation for reliability had spread, and people regularly sought out both him and Kira for help with problems that didn't require official intervention. Kira's talent for electronics had grown legendary among the working-class families who couldn't afford professional repair services. She'd also become the station's unofficial translator for newly arrived refugees. Her gift for languages, combined with her own experience of being different and displaced, made her uniquely qualified to help families navigate their first days on Starport Genesis. Devon would often return from work to find their apartment filled with grateful parents whose children Kira had helped enroll in schools, or whose medical forms she'd helped them understand. Despite her physical limitations, Kira moved through their world with confidence and purpose. She'd learned to compensate for her weakened left arm by developing incredible dexterity in her right hand. Her breathing issues meant she couldn't run like other kids, but she could sit still for hours, completely focused on complex repair work that would frustrate most adults. To the galaxy at large, they were invisible, a maintenance worker and his disabled alien daughter, just 2 more faces in the crowd of billions who called space stations home. But in their small community, they'd become something precious. Proof that family isn't about blood or species or circumstances of birth. It's about choosing to show up for each other, day after day, no matter how difficult things get. As Devon watched Kira carefully calibrate a broken atmospheric sensor for their neighbor, he realized they'd built something beautiful together. Not just a family, but a life filled with purpose and connection that neither of them could have found alone. The morning started like any other Tuesday on Starport Genesis. Devon was finishing his overnight shift in the diplomatic wing, a section of the station he rarely worked in due to its high security clearance. But 3 maintenance workers had called in sick, and someone needed to clean the ceremonial halls before an important arrival later that day. Kira had insisted on coming with him, as she often did during school holidays. At 10 years old, she'd become his unofficial assistant, carrying supplies and helping with tasks her small hands could manage better than his. The diplomatic wing fascinated her. Its polished floors and elaborate decorations were so different from their humble living quarters. "Dad, look at these symbols," Kira whispered, pointing to intricate carvings along the wall. Her breathing mask made her voice slightly muffled, but Devon could hear the excitement. "I've seen these before in the database archives. They're from the Celestine Empire." Devon nodded absently while mopping the marble floor. He'd heard of the Celestines, one of the most powerful civilizations in the galaxy, known for their advanced technology and strict social hierarchies. Their empire controlled dozens of star systems, and their leaders rarely visited backwater stations like Genesis. "The news feed said their Empress is coming here today," Kira continued, studying the wall carvings with intense curiosity. "She's been searching for someone important. A missing family member, I think." "Well, we better make sure everything's spotless then," Devon replied, focusing on a stubborn stain near the ceremonial entrance. Imperial types notice every speck of dust. They worked in comfortable silence for the next hour. Kira organized cleaning supplies while Devon handled the heavy equipment. It was peaceful in the diplomatic wing, no crowds of travelers, no crying children, no constant chatter over the comm systems. Just the quiet hum of air recyclers and the gentle sound of Devon's mop against the floor. That's when everything changed. The main entrance doors slid open with a soft hiss, and Devon looked up expecting to see a security guard or maybe a low-level diplomat. Instead, he found himself staring at the most magnificent being he'd ever encountered. The Empress stood nearly 7 feet tall, her pale blue skin seeming to glow with an inner light. Elaborate silver markings covered her face and hands, and her presence filled the room with an almost electric energy. But Devon barely had time to register the Empress's appearance because something extraordinary was happening to Kira. His adopted daughter had gone completely still, her dark eyes wide with shock. The silver patches on her own blue skin, marks Devon had always assumed were scars from whatever trauma she'd suffered as an infant, began to shimmer and glow, responding to the Empress's presence like metal drawn to a magnet. The Empress took one look at Kira and stumbled backward as if she'd been struck. Her composed, regal expression crumbled into something raw and desperate. For several heartbeats, the most powerful ruler in 3-star systems stood frozen, staring at a 10-year-old girl in maintenance coveralls. "Impossible," the Empress whispered, her voice carrying an accent Devon had only heard in official broadcasts. "My daughter, my Zara?" Devon's mind reeled. He stepped protectively in front of Kira, his cleaning equipment forgotten. "I'm sorry, Your Majesty, but there's been some mistake. This is my daughter, Kira. We should go and let you conduct your business." But the Empress wasn't listening to him. She was focused entirely on Kira, who seemed equally transfixed. The silver markings on both their skin pulsed in perfect synchronization, creating a light show that made the ornate ceremonial hall seem dim by comparison. "The genetic resonance," the Empress breathed, taking a step closer. "After 10 years of searching, of hoping, you're alive. You survived." Kira's voice was barely audible through her breathing mask. "I don't understand. Devon is my father. He saved me. He raised me." The Empress's eyes filled with tears that seemed to glow like liquid starlight. "You were taken from me during the rebellion. Your transport was destroyed. I was told no one survived. I've spent a decade believing my only child was dead." Devon felt his world tilting sideways. The tiny, broken creature he'd found in that disposal container 10 years ago wasn't just some abandoned alien infant. She was royalty, the heir to one of the galaxy's most powerful empires. The little girl who helped him fix broken comm panels and brought him tea during long shifts was a princess. "The deformities," the Empress continued, her voice breaking. "Your arm, your breathing problems, those aren't birth defects. They're injuries from the attack. Battle scars that prove you're a survivor." Kira looked between the Empress and Devon, confusion and fear warring across her young face. "But I'm not a princess. I'm just Kira. I live in Sector 12 and I help Dad with his work and I fix things for the neighbors." The Empress knelt down, bringing herself closer to Kira's height. "You are Princess Zara of the Celestine Empire. You're my daughter. And you?" She looked at Devon with something approaching wonder. "You saved the future of my people." Devon's legs felt weak. In one moment, everything he thought he knew about their life had been turned upside down. The hours following the revelation felt like living in a nightmare. Within minutes of the Empress recognizing Kira, the diplomatic wing had filled with Celestine guards, medical specialists and advisors who spoke in rapid, clipped tones about bloodline verification and immediate extraction protocols. Devon found himself pushed to the sidelines, watching helplessly as strangers examined the daughter he'd raised for 10 years. "The genetic markers are unmistakable," announced the chief medical officer, a tall Celestine with elaborate silver tattoos covering his arms. "This is indeed Princess Zara. However, her condition is concerning. These injuries should have been treated years ago with proper Celestine medical technology." The Empress's expression hardened as she looked at Devon. "You've done what you could with primitive human medicine, but my daughter requires immediate transport to the Imperial medical facilities. Her damaged lung tissue can be fully regenerated, and her arm can be reconstructed." Kira, who had been unusually quiet during the medical examination, finally spoke up. Her voice was small but determined. "I don't want to go anywhere without Devon. He's my dad." The room fell silent. Several Celestine advisors exchanged uncomfortable glances, while the Empress's face showed a mixture of pain and frustration. "Child," one of the advisors said in a condescending tone, "this human is not your father. He is merely the caretaker who found you. Your real family, your real life, awaits on Celestine Prime." Devon felt his heart breaking as he watched Kira shrink back from these strangers who claimed to know what was best for her. 10 years of bedtime stories, scraped knees, homework help, and quiet conversations by their small viewport were being dismissed as nothing more than temporary babysitting. "She doesn't understand," the Empress said, though Devon could hear doubt creeping into her voice. "Zara has been raised in poverty, surrounded by lesser beings. Once she sees the glory of her true heritage, she'll realize where she belongs." That's when Devon found his voice. "Lesser beings?" he said, stepping forward despite the guard's suspicious looks. "That little girl has never known poverty the way you mean it. She's rich in ways your empire can't measure. She has neighbors who trust her with their most precious possessions. She has friends from a dozen different worlds who seek her advice. She has a community that depends on her." The Empress turned to face him, her glowing eyes cold and distant. "And what can you offer her that an empire cannot? What future exists for her in these corridors, cleaning floors and fixing broken machines?" "The same future I've given her for 10 years, Devon replied steadily. "One where she's valued for her kindness, not her bloodline. Where she's appreciated for her brilliant mind and generous heart, not her ability to rule over others." Before the Empress could respond, alarms began blaring throughout the station. The lights flickered to emergency red, and Captain Morrison's voice echoed over the comm system. "All personnel to secure positions. We have hostile ships approaching. This is not a drill." The Celestine advisors immediately began talking about evacuation procedures and protecting the royal bloodline. But Devon's mind went straight to practical concerns. "The residential sectors," he said urgently. "All those families, the elderly, the children, they need to get to the secure shelters in the lower levels." "That's not our concern," snapped one of the advisors. "Our priority is getting the princess to safety." Kira looked horrified. "What about Mrs. Rodriguez? She can't walk fast enough to reach the shelters. And the Chin family just had a new baby. They'll need help carrying their things." The Empress stared at her daughter in confusion. "You're worried about servants and refugees when your own life is in danger?" "They're not servants," Kira said firmly, her breathing becoming more labored as stress affected her damaged lungs. "They're my friends. They're my family too." That's when everything went wrong. The station shuddered under weapons fire, and the lights went out completely. In the darkness, Devon heard shouts and the sound of running feet. Emergency lighting kicked in, casting eerie red shadows across the ceremonial hall. "Assassination squad," one of the guards reported grimly. "Celestine rebels who don't want the princess to return alive. They've infiltrated the station." The Empress made a command decision. "We evacuate immediately. My ship can protect her." But Kira had already slipped away from the group. Devon saw her heading toward the service corridors that led to the residential sectors, the same paths they'd walked together every day for 10 years. "Kira, wait." Devon called, but she was already disappearing into the maintenance tunnels. "She knows these passages better than anyone," Devon told the stunned Celestines. "If you want to keep her safe, you'll need my help. I know every shortcut, every hiding place, every way to move through this station without being seen." For the first time since arriving, the Empress looked at Devon not as a servant, but as someone essential to her daughter's survival. The chase through Starport Genesis's maintenance tunnels lasted 6 grueling hours. Devon led the Empress and her guards through passages so narrow they had to crawl, past machinery so loud they couldn't hear their own breathing, and through sections where the artificial gravity flickered unpredictably. But his knowledge of every pipe, every service hatch, and every forgotten corner kept them ahead of the assassins hunting Kira. They found her in the residential shelter, helping elderly Mrs. Rodriguez breathe through a makeshift oxygen mask while the Chen family's baby slept peacefully in her arms. Despite being hunted by trained killers, despite learning her entire identity had been a lie, Kira had spent those dangerous hours making sure her neighbors were safe. The Empress watched in stunned silence as her daughter coordinated refugee families, distributed emergency supplies, and used her technical skills to repair a damaged air recycler that was failing in the overcrowded shelter. This wasn't the behavior of someone raised in luxury and privilege. This was someone who understood that survival meant taking care of each other. When the all-clear finally sounded and the assassins had been captured, the real conversation began. They gathered in Devon's small apartment, the Empress having to duck through doorways designed for average-height humans, her elegant robes looking absurdly out of place among the second-hand furniture and jury-rigged electronics. "I've made my decision," Kira announced before anyone else could speak. "I'll accept that I'm Princess Zara, but I won't abandon who I am or where I come from." The Empress started to protest, but Kira continued with a determination that reminded everyone exactly whose daughter she was. "For 10 years, you searched the galaxy for me while I was right here, learning what it means to build something meaningful. Devon didn't just save my life, he taught me that real power comes from service, not from sitting on a throne giving orders to people you've never met." Devon felt pride swelling in his chest as he watched the young woman he'd raised stand up to the most powerful ruler in known space. "If I'm going to be your heir," Kira said to her birth mother, "then the Celestine Empire needs to change. We're going to rule from here, from Starport Genesis, where I can stay connected to real people living real lives." The Empress's advisors looked horrified. "Your Highness, the Empire has been ruled from Celestine Prime for over 1,000 years. The royal palace, the ceremonial traditions, the symbolic importance dash. Symbols don't feed hungry families," Kira interrupted. "Ceremonies don't fix broken life support systems or teach refugee children how to read. If our empire is so great, why are there still people suffering in sectors like this one?" Over the following weeks, as news of the lost princess's return spread across the galaxy, something unprecedented happened. Instead of Kira being transformed by royal privilege, she began transforming the empire itself. Her first official act was naming Devon as her chief cultural advisor, not some made-up title to make him feel important, but a genuine position with real authority over policies affecting working families throughout Celestine space. His decades of experience understanding how ordinary people lived and worked became invaluable in creating programs that actually helped instead of just looking good in official reports. The royal court relocated to a modest complex built adjacent to Starport Genesis, where Kira could maintain her connections to the diverse community that had shaped her values. Instead of traditional courtiers, her advisors included former refugees, skilled technicians, teachers, and small business owners who understood the challenges facing regular citizens. Her damaged arm and breathing problems, once seen as shameful weaknesses, became powerful symbols throughout the empire. Disability advocacy groups that had been ignored for generations suddenly found themselves with unlimited funding and direct access to the throne. Medical research into treatments for conditions affecting working-class populations received unprecedented support. But perhaps most importantly, Kira established what became known as the Genesis Protocol, a galaxy-wide network of assistance programs administered not by distant bureaucrats, but by local community leaders who understood their neighbors' actual needs. Devon's approach of quiet, practical help became the model for how the empire interacted with its citizens. The changes weren't without controversy. Traditional nobles complained about the common influences corrupting royal dignity. Some Celestine colonies resisted having their problems solved by someone they saw as a disabled charity case raised by a human janitor. But Kira had learned from Devon that the most important work happens quietly, one person at a time. Every policy she implemented, every decision she made, came from the same simple principle that had guided their life together. When someone needs help, you help them. Years later, historians would debate whether Princess Zara's unconventional reign represented a revolution or an evolution. But for the millions of beings whose lives improved because a human maintenance worker had once chosen to rescue an abandoned alien child, the academic discussions mattered less than the simple truth Kira embodied every day. Real power isn't about commanding others, it's about empowering them. And sometimes the most important thing you can do is show up with a mop and a willingness to clean up whatever mess needs fixing.